About a conversation about bike advocacy in Denver. I'm joined now by Rob Toftness, who is a bike advocate on Twitter mostly. I see you all over the place. Yeah. Nicole McSpirit and Tenley Williams. Thank you all for joining me. Appreciate it. So I wanted to talk about the last few years. It seems that the city has started to listen to your pleas a bit more. What do you guys think that the turning point was to get there? Rob, we can start with you.
I do think, you know, the Vision Zero pledge and then the increase in deaths was a big deal. It made a lot of news, and I think that lit a lot of fires under people to do better and go faster.
Did it seem like the city was listening before?
I don't know, because I've been more and more involved in, say, like the last 3 years. So the deeper I get, the more people I get to know. It seems like they're listening more recently, though, for sure.
Nicole, anything you want to add to that?
I definitely agree that the conversation seems to have changed a little bit, where before it just seemed like we're constantly saying the same things over and over again without getting much done. And now we're seeing some things in the plans, the city plans that are going on. I'm hopeful. You know, it's still in the planning phases, a lot of things, but I'm hopeful that some of these things will be implemented. Maybe some of it's because of climate change, street congestion. You know, I think there's a bunch of reasons that things are maybe finally starting to move in the right direction.
A couple of years ago, somebody I knew very well was killed on their bicycle. And then last year, a neighbor was killed on her bicycle. And when that happens, I can't stand silent, and I'm glad that the city can't either.
Mm-hmm. It's good to see them moving in the direction and listening to a lot more people. What do you think was the most significant thing that the city has done in the last 2 years, 3 years, even as far back as 5 years, to help this community out and help people get around?
Well, like I said, I've become a lot more involved since people I know have been so greatly affected by traffic violence. So I don't know exactly the timing of when various plans have come out. I just know that progress is being made. There's a lot more we can do. We can do it faster. But Denver voters have been very generous in bond funding and the like to help infrastructure come into place to help all road users be safer.
Nicole, can you look and see something specific out there that has been a significant development?
Well, just some of the things. I've had 2 daughters go to East High School, and now they're finally planning, after probably 10 years of complaining about the parking situation there, they're actually going to be putting in protected bike lanes on the Esplanade, which will just help everyone, especially our children, who a lot of kids ride to school. The bike racks are always full. So to know that they'll have a bit safer route there is great. But other plans like that, just seeing these plans in the works for protected bike lanes, for buffered bike lanes. I mean, maybe we can do things a little bit better, but it's nice to see those plans being made, and hopefully they'll follow through.
And Rob, you and I met talking about SB, give me the reminder, what's the bill number?
40.
Used to be on your shirt, I remember that. That was a positive development. What other positive developments have you seen?
To be like really specific, there was like they fortified 15th Street, which I used to call the death chute. That thing was scary. Even on 14th, they added some bollards to keep people from using it as a parking lane. The move from painted lanes as kind of, or even sharrows as the default, to talking more about protected lanes is huge. So that would be probably the best thing I've seen.
I was going to say, sharrows may be the most confusing thing in the world because I don't think drivers see them, bikes see them, and then think that they have more clearance than they really end up having because the drivers aren't paying attention.
And when you're looking at your phone, you don't see a sharrow anyway. Yeah. So, but Denver gets to lay claim to inventing those as well. So we should get them out.
Let's talk about least or most significant thing that hasn't happened in Denver or anywhere else. And anybody feel free to jump in.
We were talking about sidewalks. I think that's a big issue. Just seeing what other vulnerable road users have to go through to get from point A to point B. It's terrifying as an able-bodied person trying to get across some of these streets with icy patches and Just to think that someone would be stuck in their home for weeks on end. We still have ice patches now, 3 weeks after our last snowstorm. So I think we need to really focus on that, especially these intersections, making them clear so people can get across the street safely.
I would agree with that, that just expanding the perspective of road users, that it's not all about car users. You know, we need to take into account pedestrians, wheelchair users, people of all ages, bicyclists, and transit users as well. You know, there are solutions to these problems, and we can bring them to Denver.
I think one of the things that you guys run into on Twitter and everywhere else are the drivers and the car culture people who you kind of clash with. I'm sure they're watching this right now, and I'm sure that they are thinking, is it really realistic to get more people on bikes as this city becomes more and more crowded? Wouldn't it be more realistic to invest in roads to keep our roads from being too crowded and congested?
I'm happy to speak to that because I drive 2 kids around. Sometimes I bicycle them around, and sometimes they ride their own bikes, and I love that, but it's not always practical. And I hate sitting in traffic as much as anyone else. And I think about when we're talking about safer streets for everyone and bicycling infrastructure, we're talking about allowing the people who want to bicycle, who want to use transit, who want to walk or roll wherever they're going, the ability to do that safely. And when we do that, people will make that choice. They will choose not to drive. They will choose not to sit in traffic. And that's going to make life a lot easier for people who are driving and who can't get where they're going any other way. So it really can improve quality of life for everyone.
I like to call that like induced demand, but for people. So if you know, a lot of people say, well, there's no one riding there. There isn't a bike lane there. A lot of people are scared to do it. You put the bike lane in and people show up. And so if we keep building these like 4-lane downtown streets, we're going to have just cars. And at some point, they're going to fill up and you can't go any further. So we're going to have to do something differently. So we can fight with the drivers as much as we want, but they have to realize that there's just a volume issue. And so the more people we can get out of the cars and out of their way, it's the better for them.
And that applies to parking too.
Absolutely.
You know, everybody wants to have more parking at their destination. And one of the best ways to do that is providing one parking spot where you can cram in 20 bikes.
Yeah.
You know, that frees up a lot of parking spots.
The culture clash there between drivers and cyclists has always been something. Anytime I do a story about bikes, the number one piece of feedback I get is usually from drivers saying they're not paying their fair share. Most of the bikes that I run into are really, they're angry cyclists. How do you improve that conversation between drivers and cyclists? Because right now it's really just adversarial.
For me, so I grew up like in a county, in Larimer County, and we drove to baseball and we drove to school, and you were in a car. And it wasn't until I had this experience of getting down here and getting on a bike that it was like a light bulb went off. I don't know if we could talk for hours, and I don't think you convince someone that's really hardcore about it. Honestly, if they get on a bike for a week, I think their perspective would change. So if we can get, like, I've invited friends down and said, hey, let's go rent some jump bikes. And all of a sudden, next week, they've brought their wife back downtown, and they're on a jump bike, and it just kind of keeps going. The experience is really important.
Can you get past that anger?
Absolutely. I think the problem is it's really hard to have a conversation when one person's on their bicycle and the other person is in their car. That's not conducive to actually saying, here's my perspective, let me hear your perspective now. There have been a lot of really contentious public meetings about these issues, and while it's difficult and challenging, it has given people a place to actually talk through their perspective and have more nuanced conversations about where they're coming from and, most importantly, what their priorities are. You know, at one public meeting last fall, I thought the best question of the night was asked by a 9-year-old. And she asked, why is it that people put their own personal convenience ahead of safety? You know, kids get it. They get that they don't want to just feel safer because there's a Shero painted on the road. They want to actually be safer. They want actual protection. And I thought a question like that was very clear about, okay, you know, she was showing that she heard what they wanted. They wanted convenience. They wanted their street to stay the same and be beautiful and have parking. And she said, okay, I hear that, but what about safety? Why is that not the top priority?
What's the best way to get past arguing about this?
I think some of it is just misinformation. A lot of people think we don't belong in the roads because we don't pay this theoretical road tax, which doesn't exist. Funding for our roads comes from a variety of sources. Many of us own cars and drive as well. You know, it's one of those things that you hear the same things kind of thrown back at you. Get on the sidewalk. Don't
Get
do
off the
this.
sidewalk.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, come to a full stop. Don't come to a full stop.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's really, you feel almost defeated because you can't explain this to people who are yelling at you when they zoom past you and a few inches away.
It's really tough when like a F-150 rolled up next to me and told me that I don't belong here. And yes, I do. I don't know what to tell you, man. But we're going to both go straight, and you stay over there and I'll stay over here. But it's kind of frightening, the difference in mass when you're sitting there trying to talk to someone. It's not easy to do.
I'll let you get your jabs in on us because the media covers all of these issues, and I hate to use the collective term, the media, but what are journalists doing? How are they covering these issues, and how could we do it better?
So there's always a discussion of like crash versus accident. That's a big one. The language that is used is really, really important. The other thing is that there's this real pushback against saying it was a driver that hit a cyclist, rather than, you read all the articles and it's a car jumped a curb or a car hit, and it makes it sound like the car is autonomous, and they're not. There's someone behind the wheel. And I don't think it assigns blame to say a driver hit a cyclist. Someone was operating a vehicle and that's what happened. That's just a fact. But because we see that language about a car doing it so much, it removes that agency from the operator. And I think that's a little dangerous too.
So kind of changing headlines. How could we cover this community better?
You know, I wonder if maybe speaking more to some of the misinformation that we hear on a regular basis, and really delving into the policy aspects that make life difficult for cyclists. The people that I know who have been killed on their bicycles, there's been very little justice in my mind for that. And you know, there's always a lot of coverage when something tragic happens, and then not always a lot of follow-up to say, okay, what happened after that? How is that family doing now? What do they want to see? What can we do better as a community to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
And I mean, I think you guys here do a really good job. I can't say that for a lot of places, but yeah, the verbiage really counts. You know, just making sure that you are telling the full story, but you know, when it's known, not. Like I said, I don't think you guys do this as much, but not jumping to a conclusion and just figuring that, oh well, since they stayed on the scene of the crash, that you know they're perfectly in the right. Yeah, just correcting some of these thoughts that we see all the time on Twitter. These the same kind of arguments. You know, I heard someone the other day say, "Oh well, bikes are just such nuisances." Well, we're not the ones killing people on bikes are not the ones killing 40,000 people a year. I don't think that we rise to that level of a nuisance, maybe inconvenience.
That gets back to Rob's point. Go ahead.
It would be really cool to see some follow-up on, say, like something happened on a street. Is the speed limit too much? Have there been historical incidences there? Was design a factor? Because those are really important too, and they seem to get missed a lot.
That's a great point, Rob. There are solutions to all of these problems. So there's frequently, again, present company excluded perhaps, there tends to be an emphasis on the problem, and really we could have a lot of emphasis on the solutions, the possibilities that could make our city and our state really, really great.
Yeah. Back to Rob's point. I mean, when I started riding, that was one of the times when I started to realize, as a kid from Detroit who grew up in the Motor City where there are no bikes, I'm pretty sure, or public transit, anything like that, that it's a much different perspective, and until you've done it, you don't really know what these issues are. Thank you all so much for coming in. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. We'll keep the conversation going over the next weeks and months. We really appreciate it.
Great, thank you so much.
Subscribe to the Next YouTube channel for the best of Next and some other stuff.